Hello, this is Derek Hansen for StrengthPowerSpeed.com, and this is our 12th episode of our Performance Concepts chat. In this episode, I had the pleasure of talking with Jorge Carvajal, and like many of the people I talk to, I really know George through interactions on social media, maybe an email, but basically I've never met the man in person. But he's one of those guys where I feel like I've known him for years. So getting to talk to him, interview him was a real pleasure because he has experience, he has wisdom. He's a funny guy too, so you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And I thought at first we'd talk a bit about philosophy, training philosophy, but what ends up happening in a lot of these discussions is we don't talk a lot about sets, reps, exercises. I mean, we may touch on it, but for the most part, we're talking about philosophies in relation to training, but also in relation to life and how we make our way through the sports performance industry, physical preparation, strength and conditioning, whatever you want to call it. And you start to find individuals who are maybe finding a niche for themselves, an area of expertise, or just even a client base that they like working with. And you'll see in this discussion with George, we don't just talk about, we have to make it to the highest level of pro sport or the top NCAA Division I team. We talk about wanting to coach, wanting to make people better. And some of us will be able to work at those levels, but there can be a lot of enjoyment and a lot of gratification out of working with people at various levels. If you get a chance to work with pro sport athletes, that's awesome. There's obvious benefits of that, but for the most part, you really have to be able to, find enjoyment in the work you do itself, and obviously the relationships you have with people. And this is what you're going to get about George and how he handles himself and even in his personal life and the releases he has. At some point, I think we're all going to reach a level where maybe we're working too hard. We're, rather than taking vacations, we're going to conferences, and rather than reading, books for enjoyment, we're reading books about, the industry and physical preparation and rehab and all those things. And at some point, I think you have to step away. And I think he's managed to do that in a way that's fulfilling for him, keeps him healthy physically, mentally. And, these are the details that you're going to get from our talk with Jorge Carvajal. So please enjoy the talk. This is somebody I would, if you're going to travel and go meet somebody, this is one of the guys that I recommend you just go and hang out with. And I think you'll get a lot from just the wisdom he can provide and just connecting with him on a very human, personal level. So please enjoy our podcast. Hey, George, it's great to have you on. I know we've been trying to organize this for the last couple of weeks or so, and we're both busy people, which is good. But I wanted to nail you down and just talk to you about your philosophy more than anything on training and life and how you conduct your business and your personal life and how it all integrates. And I think these are things that I want to convey to people out there is it's not just about becoming a strength coach or working with athletes. There's a bigger picture to all of this and how you integrate your personal life with the people you work with. And so one of the first questions I want to ask you is, rather than go through how you got here and all the different steps, because I know that you've done other interviews and that's outlined, but what are the major influences that have guided your career, whether it's a person, whether it's something that's happened to you in the past, or whether it's just somebody you talk to? What can you tell us about that?
That, for me, it's my entry into strength and conditioning is super traditional. It really started just being, high school athlete and going to college and walking on. And for me, strength and conditioning then was simply just a means to an end, right? Nothing more than that. I went to a file cabinet. I pulled out a 3x5 card, and sometimes I think there was a 5x8 card in there with my program. I did the program, put it back, and the next day I know somebody picked it up and obviously made some notations, and it was called program design. I didn't know what that was. That's all I did. And what happened is I had 5 concussions over a 14-month period. And the last one was pretty bad. And basically, the neurologist said, "Hey, you're not going to be a pro ball player. Like, you're not going into the NFL. Like, what are you doing? Like, what's your thoughts?" And didn't really think about strength and conditioning, but the strength coach at the school where I was at the University of Florida, Rich Tootin, who was with the Denver Broncos, I think, for 10 years. I spoke to him a little bit about it, and there was a course. It was strength conditioning for students. It was like a semester course. And that's what really then started to kind of whet my appetite. I started to really want to understand, how does this 3x5 card get put together? Like, why the exercises? Why those? What's the context? And the class was really cleaning up the weight room. That's what it was. But I really started to delve a little bit more and ask more questions. And so he became, I guess, my first mentor. Not that he knows about it, probably doesn't even know who I was, but at the time, he just looked, breathed, acted like a strength and conditioning coach. Like, if you picture somebody that is a stereotypical guy, that was him. And it was really about learning about speed, because the SEC was about speed. And my experience when I left from there to Nebraska was completely different, because Nebraska was about bigger, faster, stronger. So two completely different opposite spectrums of strength and conditioning, but really about programming. And going from where I was at Florida, which is, again, kind of very traditional, I ended up in Nebraska, and Boyd Epley, and the father of strength and conditioning. And I knew I was at a special place, and I knew that that was special. I didn't know how special. And it took me a while to realize that when, really people pointing it out, do you know where you're at, and do you know who you're working with? And the answer was, yeah, I read his stuff in the, NCAA articles or journals. Like, he was the guy. But as a, GA, you're just grinding. And I really didn't know how special that was, really kind of till I was almost out of there. And those were two huge influences on me.
Is there something that, like, you pull out of those experiences and learning from, say, like a Boyd Epley, that you still apply today? Like, were there some principles that he's like, this is how it's done? And I know it's the same for me, where I kind of draw back on the people that taught me, and I try to remember, and I even go back and read some of the notes that I've had. Are there certain things that you learned from an individual like that you live
You
today?
do, and it was actually a quote that started it all for me. It was the first thing I heard when I got there, and it was the last thing I heard. And I think I've mentioned this in a couple of conversations with people. It's like, well, do you have any quotes on your desk or anything, something that you? And the answer was yes. It was what he always kind of told everybody was, the great ones adapt.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know if that was what that was about. Okay, so how do you do this? It was really about understanding that in strength and conditioning, you're going to move to states and cities that you may not like, but you're going to have to adapt. You may be working with a sport that may not be your favorite, but to get your foot in the door, you're going to have to adapt. That's probably the most valuable piece of information I ever got, because, as you know, this job is about continuously adapting and being fluid. Uh, as far as the programming and stuff, it was very traditional. Husker Power, it's just making a comeback now, right? Husker Power then was the program probably around the country. Everybody really kind of wanted to copy. And it was simply basic programming: get guys bigger, get guys faster, get guys stronger, plyometrics, speed development, and then go play the game. Not a lot of differences, except that Nebraska was really about, and there was a tremendous amount of sports science being done, but it was really about that bigger, faster, stronger, where Florida was really about speed. Everything had to do with speed. Yeah, we lifted, and yeah, we threw balls, but it was really about speed. And it's still about speed. Nothing's changed about the SEC.
Now, if you had to pick between one or two of those, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Would you be the speed advocate, or would you be the bigger, faster, stronger guy? Or
Wow, that's a great question. I would have to say the speed guy, simply because the training and the progressions to get faster was the bigger, faster, stronger stuff, right?
yeah,
You jumped, You threw medicine balls and you Olympic lifted. It was really, really basic. Like the human body is really complex. Training isn't.
Now, and do you think we're overcomplicating it? I'm jumping ahead here, but do you think that perhaps people are trying to do too much of everything and diluting some of these conventional training
For
methods?
sure. One of the things that was a great influence on me uh, was in my, I think it was in my junior year, my advisor at school said, there's an opportunity here, and I think you're perfect for it. And it's in Russia. And I had never been on a plane ever in my life at that point. When we vacationed, we got in an RV and we went across the country. We never flew. So I had never flown on a plane. To think that I was going to fly to Russia was just, that was like, might as well go to Mars. But she said, this is working with Olympic sports. You'll be living with a professor, speaks English, fluent Russian. You'll learn a lot. I think you're perfect. Long story short, I ended up there. And what I learned there, which I still use today, goes back and mirrors to what you just said, which is a simplicity of things. It wasn't the weight room, because if I had a picture and I could take a picture, a cell phone picture now, of course, cell phones didn't exist. But if I could take a picture, it looked dark, it looked dungy, it had broken windows, it smelled. The padding on the benches were actually foam that were wrapped around with duct tape and different types of tape. The dumbbells didn't match, that kind of place. But it wasn't about that. It was about the programming. And when I want to get fancy, when people get fancy in talking different methodologies, and there's good and there's bad, I always go back to those days because it was very, very simple and it was super, super effective. They got people bigger, faster, stronger. And it was really in the science behind programming, the why. Why this exercise? Sometimes it was just a couple of exercises. It wasn't 15 exercises in a 3-hour program, right? The epitome of what vertical integration was. It was simplicity. It was minimum dose, maximum effect, because recovery was super, super, super important, right? The load in the CNS system was great, and so they needed to recover athletes, so they needed to make the programs as simple as possible. Really beautiful. It really was.
Yeah, and so I'm going to sidestep here, and I'm going to talk about basic basically your life philosophy and the philosophy that you apply in your training, because I've heard you talk about it before, and it's obviously something that I'm trying to embody as well. But how do you make your lifestyle and personal philosophy fit into what you do on the training side?
My philosophy now comes from, and I guess my story is, I had a major burnout in strength and conditioning. And as a result of that major burnout, I had to sit back and think about what was I doing? What are the things that I did right? But most importantly, what are the things that I did wrong that led to that burnout? And at that time, it was really about, I went from kind of working for myself to taking a job in team sports at the professional level, thinking that I had reached the epitome of what strength and conditioning was, and it is in many ways for many people. It just did not work out that way. It didn't look, the grass was definitely not greener. And that ended up leading to a massive burnout, not just psychologically, but physiologically. And once I tanked and left that job, was kind of left really just in nowhere land, thinking about what am I going to do here? And one of the mistakes I made was I knew what my intent, I've always known what my intent was when I got into strength and conditioning. I knew my why, which was to be of service, right? I really wanted to help athletes develop as much as they could to be, so they could be as best as they can possibly be at their sport. And somehow along the way, I lost that. And it went from what my why, knowing what my intent was, to worldly success. Wearing that team polo and that team shirt kind of makes your head start like really, really growing, right? Your head comes into the room before you do. And everybody's kind of knows that you're in that spot. So you're that guy. So ego starts to really, really grow. And none of that really worked. At that time, it was really about athletes first. Kind of really could care less about the person. It was really about the money and the position, and I was the job. That the job was me. And so the burnout led to a situation where I had to sit back and think about, okay, what was that about? Obviously, a great learning experience. And so I started to think, well, what if I change everything and just start putting people first? What if I really, instead of having a conversation about why you want to get bigger, faster, stronger, I just talk about your family and you and like, what's it like being you and growing up, and how did you get here? And that's really what changed everything. And that's really become my philosophy, not just in training, but really in life, is people first. Is I coach the person first and the athlete second. And it's somewhat of a boutique type of performance company where there is no life work balance. I've never really kind of believed in that. I think there's a lot of folly in that. It's more of a life work blend where there's no demarcation in the sand between what I do and who I am. It's just what I do. And I've been careful to limit certain things, i.e. unplugging technology and stuff, so I can remain sane. But it's really created this situation where it makes me very unique and very different than a lot of people in what they do. It's not really about the money. I don't coach for the money. I could care less about the money. It's opportunity, and what can I do for you? And can I take on this person and really progress them? If the answer is yes, then we're moving on, and it's go.
That's awesome, and I can relate to what you're talking about in terms of getting so caught up in the job, the position, where you stand within the organization. And I think there's a lot of people in that situation. And what kind of advice would you say to them right now if they're thinking, okay, my next big thing is to get, a head job here or be in the NFL, or if they're thinking like that, what would you say to them?
It's a great question, right? And we both know there's tons of people out there with that. I think I've been asked, I would say between this week and the last, we're not even, I guess we're at the halfway point now for this week. The same question, which is, how do I get to the NFL? Like, that's a question I've been asked 1,000 times if I've been asked once. And you may not really want to get to the NFL. How about you just be good right where you're at, wherever that is? High school, a personal training business, a performance company that somebody else owns, your performance company. How about you really be really good? Because that's what the world needs, right? That's what the world needs, is for you to be good and self-actualize exactly where you're at. But I would say be careful. The continued push to achieve that worldly success comes at a price. And I can tell you that from personal experience, not something I read in a book or a movie I saw. It comes at a great cost. And there was an ad that somebody sent me for, I think it was a job in, I don't know if it was Australia, New Zealand. And it was interesting because they sent it and said, hey, this is what we just talked about. And the description on the job was, this is a fast-paced and energetic environment, right? Which I love. That's coach talk for you're going to be working 70 hours a week. That's what that is. And so great. So you got the job and you're the guy. You have to be very careful. I don't really believe there's a work-life balance. I have never achieved it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, and if somebody says it does, that's great. It didn't work for me. I tried to use that four burner theory: 25% life or work, 25% family, 25% continuing education, and 25% leisure activities. That's not the way life works, right? Life is not static, so you can't do that. And if you want to be successful, you have to eliminate one of those. And if you really, really want to be successful, you have to eliminate two of those. And then where does that leave you? And that leaves you in burnout, right? That's what that happens. And that's how burnout happens. And burnout happens over an extended period of time. It's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. But the moment that you start chasing that worldly success, you're already on the bus. You don't even know about it. Subconsciously, you're already moving toward that burnout. It doesn't mean that you're going to get there. It could mean that you get off that bus, but you certainly start getting on that bus, because that means a continuous amount of consumption of information and networks and connections that really have nothing to do with the value of people, but really about what can you do for me. And that is just rampant in strength and conditioning now. My circle is about the size of, a pen dot on a piece of paper. And that's because I see that all the time is what can you do for me? There's nothing about, that cohesiveness and relationship of building. What can I do for you? Like, how can I help you? It's really about what can you do for me? And because I need to get to the next spot. Be careful. It's really not what you think it is a lot of times.
That's interesting you say that because that's been my experience as well. Is if you want to get to the next level, it doesn't have much to do with the quality of the work you do, the knowledge that you have. It's going to be more about what connection can I make, what course do I take to make it look like I know more, and it's a lot of posturing, right? So it does take you away from being good in your profession, quite honestly. So that's interesting you bring that up. Now, would you ever consider, like, if somebody said, "Hey, JC, we want you to come work for this NFL team. We think you're the man." Would you do it? And if you did, and you had some sort of freedom to manipulate the position to make it work for you, would you do it, and how would you do that?
Well, that's a good question. When I look back at some of the reasons that burnout happened, um, quite clearly, one of the things that I saw in the organization is that everybody was not on the same page. Everybody was on their own page, from the owner to the head coach, the head strength coach, to the guy that cleaned the building, to the team, equipment guy. Everybody was. It seemed like everybody had their own agenda, and so that goes back to the whole concept of Pixar and culture. Culture is super super important. I know that word gets kind of thrown around and bastardized in strength and conditioning, but it's so important when you realize it's not there. Like I recognize that it wasn't there, and that time for me was really about building a life around a coaching practice, and that doesn't work. It didn't work for me. I don't know too many people that works for. And the change was rebuilding, rebranding, and rebirthing Carvajal Performance into a company where coaching is built around the life practice, right? So going back would have to mean the ability for me to be able to still do that. For me, the things that give me flow and self-actualization are jujitsu and surfing. And so someone would say, "Well, that's nice, George. I wish I could surf every day." And the answer is, you can. Why not? You made the choice that you made to work where you're working, and so that boxes you in somewhere wherever that is. That doesn't mean you can't do that. I realize that it may look different, and I realized when the way I came to where I was, I simply took a surf trip to Indonesia and sat on a board for 6 months, just thinking about where do I go from here? I've been to the top of the mountain and I kind of fell off. What do I do now? How do I possibly come back from this? And it really had to do with I'm going to pencil in, surfing and jujitsu, and then I'll fill in coaching after that. And that's exactly what I did. Kind of jumped in the deep end of the pool with a 100-pound vest without knowing how to swim. I just did it. There was no plan. I did write some stuff out on a napkin in a restaurant, but it really had to do more with algorithm, right? Something to kind of follow, but the in between, it was just a lot of arrows pointed to nowhere. So I would if I felt the culture was there, and I think you can tell right away when you talk to coaches, right? And they know, they'll tell you, even the cleaning guys on board with what we're doing. That's when you know your organization is good because everybody's gotten the message. And so if I felt that there was a place that had that, and there are some places without question that have that, then sure I would foster the idea of doing that. I would prefer it would be on the west or east coast so I can surf, but I guess that's probably asking a little too much.
Yeah, well, that's always the question. I think sometimes, and you talked about being able to adapt, and sometimes we may over adapt or we may get so comfortable with something. And I know in your situation, sounds like you have a pretty sweet situation in terms of your freedom and doing what you want to do. Now, taking you out of that environment, would that be kind of scary for you and saying, like, hey, we're going to put you over here. We're going to hire you to work with this team in LA, and you can have all the surfing you want, but we still want you to be at the facility doing X, Y, and Z. How would
Yeah,
that?
it's scary because I'm super blessed. There's no question. I give grace, and I'm grateful every moment of every second of every breath that I take. Very, very grateful to be where I'm at. I live where people vacation, and I do that every day. I'm able to go out and surf and do the things I want to do, and I still coach. But I'm able to become a hybrid of myself in the sense that I can do a couple of different things. It would be definitely taking me out of a little bit of a box, somewhat that I've put myself in. But I'm also very fluid as a coach, and I've that's where that phrase from Boyd Epley comes in. The great ones adapt. I can adapt, and I've been able to adapt all my life. And so the answer is yeah. I don't think that would be a problem.
Now, you touched on your hobbies or passions being surfing. We've talked about skateboarding, uh, MMA or jiu-jitsu, and
Mhm.
I would classify those things as requiring a significant feel or a tactile component or this ability to assess and feel, and which may not be the same as football or basketball or any of these other sports. Now, can you and I was talking to some guys in Denver on the weekend about swimming, and it's a feel sport and having a feel for the water, and if you get away from there's consequences. Now,
Absolutely.
how do you apply that to what you do in terms of you know having this feeling and having this white noise that you work with?
It's definitely a different different sport. My NFL guys and my spec op guys call the surfers like those dudes are different. That's what they always say, and they are. They're completely different. But yeah, the mat and surfing bring together something. There's technical and there's tactical, but there's also something that I think both bring that I enjoy, which is humility. Right? Those guys understand the concept of humility, and that means sometimes understanding that what we're doing isn't necessarily what they thought they would do. Like for me, I want to build a very robust aerobic engine. And so my surf guys, and that's done through tempo runs and tempo circuits with medicine balls and stuff. A lot of times my surfing guys are like, well, what are we doing that for? Like we surf, we just want to get stronger. And the ability to be fast, the ability to accelerate and have strength and power, and that comes from the work of Jeremy Shepard, right? Simple strength and conditioning, right? And then you have to surf, and that's always something. Again, that's one of the things I learned uh, both in Russia and Florida and at Nebraska is that get them strong, get them fast, but then you have to go play the sport. And so surfing is really very tactile heavy. You're going to have to paddle out, and surfing is 90%, really 99% paddling, and that means having a robust aerobic system. But it's really about you and the board and time in the water. And I know for myself, the more time I spend out of the water, I can get back in a different break in a different part of the country, and uh, I get my wheels under me really quickly. But there is a component where there is a gray area, right? It's not very fluid, and that is the part that I like because that's part of flow. We try and create flow through the workouts, through leisure activities that we do with the guys, continuously trying to oppose the heavy CNS load that we impose on them. And at the end of the day, we're load managers. We're stress managers, right? You can call yourself physical preparation specialist, performance coach. We're load managers. We're stress managers. We impose stress, and we have the athletes recover from a stress. The great thing about surfing is that it does create flow every time you're out there. You don't have to really do anything. The guys are constantly in that flow. The mat in jiu-jitsu is the very same thing. The moment you put on your gi and you cross the threshold of what the street is, the entrance to the facility, you're already into flow. And so those are the things I think that we keep doing with our guys. All of my guys, whether they are NFL guys or the spec op guys, they all do jiu-jitsu. And I encourage everybody to do jiu-jitsu, not to learn to kick butt, but really to learn humility, to learn the art of conflict resolution, and really about flow. It's one of the best ways I've known for you to be able to get flow.
Now, that you talked about and touched on this idea of the specificity component and having to do, be in the water and be on the board, and that's obviously important. you were involved in an exchange about how do we reevaluate what we do for the NFL Combine and evaluating players and the exercises and the tests, which some people may argue are specific, and then there's other people saying no, it's
Right.
non-specific. So, in your opinion, so kind of going back to that, how do we assess people in their sport? Like obviously there's game film and getting feedback from position coaches. How do we combine all that? How do we have some physiological parameters but also put it within the context of what needs to be done in the sport? What's your thoughts on that?
That's a great question too. It's a conversation that started, I guess, on Twitter. It really started prior to that. I had a coach that sent me an email and said, uh, "I think I have this way of kind of beating, not really beating, kind of reinventing the combine." And I looked at his stuff and I thought, "This is brilliant! Like this guy figured it out." It was really simple stuff, like positional assessments, where instead of having a lineman do a 40-yard dash, he's never going to do a 40-yard right in his entire life, a 300-pound sled. Uh, and I thought, okay, so that's different. And what's different? What have I seen over the years? Like a 40 for me. A 40 really does nothing for me. 10 and 20-meter splits, they tell me everything, right? We don't even run 40s until I guess the last week before the combine. We do no 40s at all, none. It's irrelevant. But when I do see 10, 20-meter splits, if I know that someone's slow at their 10, 20 meters compared to everybody else, I know they lack maximal strength, right? They don't have enough strength to overcome gravity to go in the opposite direction. Really simple stuff. And so you look at some of the tests and you kind of scratch your head and you wonder why are we still doing this? The bench press. I know some people love the bench press and some people it's like, why are we doing this? I happen to love the broad jump. I think there's a lot of athleticism in the broad jump, and I did the Nike Spark Tour a long time ago when they were going around the country, and when I saw over and over and over was that those kids that had really good broad jumps and a good medicine ball throw, which was a kneeling forward medicine ball throw, they all played Division I football. Uh, Maybe you could say, well, that was coincidental. Maybe it could have, but I don't think so. There's an athletic component that was super super important. Uh, can we fix that test? There's no question. Will it ever happen? I don't know that it will. I think we're married to what we have right now, and that's why guys that are I respect a lot in the field, whether they like it or not, they still do it because it is what it is. I've talked to quite a few different coaches where we go around in this round table about what are the best uh, tests. What can you really measure from the sport? Can you measure something from the sport? You've had guys who've had amazing combines. Like these guys blew it out of the water and they lasted a year in the NFL. And you also have guys that were never asked to go to the combine, may have not even done well at their pro day, and 10 years later, they're still in the NFL. They're all pros. So what is that about? And I don't know how I have the answer. I have a lot of questions, and I continue to have a lot of questions with respect to that. But I think we're getting closer with positional assessments. Rollouts for a quarterback, 10-yard rollouts right and left. What do I need to know about his 40? The answer is nothing. It doesn't do anything in my programming. That's not the way I'm going to program him. If it's a skill position, then that's different versus an offensive lineman. A 300-pound sled push is going to be a little bit different, more toward what exactly that it is that he's doing. So I don't think it's going to change. I think the conversation continues. I think there's a lot of coaches out there with a tremendous amount of great ideas. And Joseph Potts comes to mind, and Kurt Hester from Louisiana Tech. Phenomenal ideas on how to really put this thing together, or at least improve on it. We're not saying get rid of it, but there are some things that you can do a little bit better. And we got quoted, I guess, myself, Kurt, and Ron McKeefrey on a Stack article that Joseph Potts did, and he did a great job of, hey, here's what some guys think should be done or could be done differently, not necessarily better. We're just thinking there's a better way to do that. How do we? And that's a question I've always had is when I do an analysis of the sport and then analysis of the athlete, and then put together that whatever comes out as a program is how do I best analyze what's going on with the sport. Surfing was super hard. Even though I surfed, I started to realize that I didn't really know how to program for surfing. I just surfed. I never really thought about it. And I started to realize that hip mobility, ankle mobility, and thoracic mobility was super important, but so was power. I learned that from Jeremy Shepard. I never really thought about, you know, working with power and testing power on a surfer, but it's made a huge difference because it can accelerate faster with power. It's kind of basic going back to, the Russian influence. It's really just getting back to the basics. What are you doing in the sport, and can you test it, and not just go around in a circle just because we've been doing something for a long time.
Yeah, and for the combine situation, would one of the recommendations at least be have position specific
Sure,
groupings?
absolutely, absolutely. I think that's one of the conversation I had with Kurt Hester, and I think he blew it out of the water when he specifically said, "Hey, here's what I think really would work as far as a positional assessment." And I thought, like, why hasn't anybody thought of this? It's super simple, but it really seems to capture a lot of the assessment for the position. I'm using it now. I use it this year, and I gave him some feedback, and I was kind of blown away that I think I'm going to keep doing this. I think it really makes a big difference.
Now, or I'm going to back off of the combine discussion, but a lot of the discussions I've been having with people lately um, is there an element, in your opinion, that we should have some degree of natural selection take over? Like I'm always trying to assess what my contribution is to an athlete, but sometimes is it okay to step back and kind of let things happen and watch and observe, and then maybe maybe it's a lighter coaching light or whatever you want to call it. But do you ever find that you don't want to put too much emphasis on what you're doing specifically as a coach and maybe let other external factors come into play?
100%. Let the athlete self actualize, right, in many ways, and that's less cueing and less coaching, and just let it happen. Let the athlete be the athlete, and I think that there is inherently a lot of knowledge that comes back from, an example would be just a dynamic warm up. Using that as your functional movement screen. It's a live functional dynamic movement screen, and you see what he's doing, and then they can self-regulate, right, just based on what you're seeing. You can change the structure of the workout. They can auto-regulate themselves. Hey, I went hard and I'm just not feeling it. Good, we're done. Bar speed uh, slows down. You have your bar speed set at 1 and they're consistently hitting 8 7s and 8s. You're done. Fatigue is already set in. So that's part of coaching, but you have to let the athlete just be the athlete. I love that part of coaching because athletes get it. After a while, they can coach themselves. They really can.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had a late night conversation with Jim Radcliffe in Denver, and we were talking about that. And I think he's been around a long time, and he's kind of seen this new wave of sports science come in, and I think the impression I got from him was that we're trying to control everything. We're trying to control recovery, and we had this exchange on foam rolling, like everybody's thinking, oh, this is how we get people ready, and we got to make them feel good all the time, right? What are your thoughts on that?
No, because then how in the world do you or does adaptation occur when we're just continuously taking the athlete out of adaptation? You got to let him get beat up because adaptation happens as a result of getting beat up. So it's like I just read something on not taking antioxidants the day that you trained uh, because it interferes with adaptation. And it made perfect sense. It was like, it's really simple. This is not really complicated stuff. But I think we're getting, and I don't know if sports science has anything to do with it. I think it really does, is we're just boxing everything that we can box. And instead of just letting the athlete be the athlete, letting the athlete get a little beat up, let adaptation occur so supercompensation can occur. If we keep interrupting that process, and there is no supercompensation, there's maladaptation. So yeah, I think we're interfering too much, and I don't know. I'm kind of in the Jimmy Radcliffe kind of school of old school type coaching is let the athlete be the athlete.
And we talk about this old school approach, and is there a way to? And you talked about Husker Power and this resurgence, or having this retro approach. How do we make everything work together? How do we bring in what was maybe old school or considered you know from the old days? How do we keep what's good, but then sprinkle in some of this new stuff? You know.
I think just be yourself, like when you coach. I really like guys, and I respect a lot of guys that, the technology's here, and everybody's just hitting them over the head with the technology or the new book and what the new book says, and they just do what they do. And they do what they do because they know it works. And so they might sprinkle in. Here's a kind of example of that for me is recovery, right? For me, recovery is about working with light and dark cycles. It's about recovering someone's circadian rhythm if they happen to be a night owl. Really simple. Like that's how we start recovery. The conversation isn't post-workout shakes or Normatec boots or um, cold hot showers or cryotherapy. It's simply what time do you go to bed and what time do you go get up, and then we start working with that 7 to 9 hours, right? And if we're not monitoring, if you're not using technology or HRV, it's really simple. If you're really a hard workout, that's 9 hours of sleep, right? If it's a semi 20 to 30% less volume day because you don't really feel it, you didn't really sleep well, that's a 9 hour day. If everything has been fine, then maybe you can do 7 hours, right? The harder you train, the more sleep you need. You didn't train that hard, kind of good to go, 7 hours. Really simple without using HRV stuff. So we work with light and dark cycles first, and then we start moving up from there. So right now we're working with flotation tanks, right? That's kind of the sprinkle is get the guys to sleep good, sleep in a cave, sleep it with a 65, 68 degree thermostat. That's great. And then to start sprinkling in the flotation tank. We'll do that, once a week for 30 minutes. Some guys are doing an hour, and we're seeing what happens with HRV. Really, I'm really using the coach's eye. What does this guy look like the next day? Like he's like really groovy and hey, I'm good to go, or is he like, man, that didn't work for me? And we're getting a little bit of both. Some guys are kind of not really cool with it, uh, partly because I think it has a bit of a claustrophobic situation associated with it. But some guys, it's like meditating for 60 hours. And that's the effect that I had when I went in there because I'm a regular meditator. That it was like super, super steroided meditation. It was like 60 hours of meditation in a 30-minute tank. So I'm very old school when it comes to the training modalities and the program design and what I know what the athlete needs. I know the tools. I know the context that it needs to happen in. But what I do is that's exactly what I do is I just sprinkle in some stuff and the whole Bruce Lee thing. If it works, keep it. If it doesn't work, you kind of throw it out. I think a lot of people get married, to a modality. It could be foam rolling. It could be cryotherapy. It could be the Normatec boots. It could be a specific post-workout shake with cherry extract. And it works for some guys, so you leave it in there. But I really respect the guys that they just coach because they know that this is what it is, right? Um, and then they sprinkle some stuff, and if it works, great. And if it doesn't, but they go back to what their base model of coaching is, which is I know what works, and all this stuff is noise, and I
Yeah.
don't need any more noise. Let me just go with what I have. I know it works.
In when you talk about throwing in different modalities or methods, how much variability do you think you need? Like, and obviously it's going to be individual, but do you purposefully try to rotate things through so that people don't over adapt?
One of the things I like to do is I let the athletes choose the exercise. I give them sort of a template and let them choose, and that choice gives them that. Oh, I like if the exercise or whatever the session sucks, you pick that exercise. So maybe we need to change it. But what really happens is that they buy in, right? They buy in because they're part of the design of this program that's really meant for them. It's not for me. It's for them. It's for you. So that really helps a lot. I think when you start kind of segueing off of that, then you start having some problems, right? It's not, and I said it before. The human body is really complex. I think training is not, but I think we're sort of kind of making it more complex than it needs to be. And I'm as guilty as anybody else. I go down that rabbit hole, and I come out the other end. It's like, well, I didn't need to do that. I know it works, and it goes back to the same thing.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. And I think probably one of the good qualities that you bring is that you are constantly evaluating your impact, and you're constantly questioning. Like if you're like me, we're like, well, gee, even though you have all this experience behind you, you're going, is that still right? Should I still be
Hmm.
doing that? You find that?
Exactly. Exactly. It's exactly. Uh, it's continuously trying to look at what you're doing, not in an attempt to find fault. Fault is going to come, right? You're going to have failures. More of, you know, can I do something better? Because in the end, that's what I get paid for, and that's what I do. Is I really want to help the athlete get better. I really want to be able to get them to a point where they feel like they've given their very best, and the day they leave that sport, I I, I gave everything I could, and we help them do that. It's it's difficult sometimes to realize that you can't do everything, right? And you want to, and that was part of, without question, part of the burnout for me is continuously trying to consume information because I never figured I can't figure this out. I need more information, and everything I read was strength and conditioning. Every vacation I took was to a conference. I never went anywhere. It was it's San Diego, or I can surf there, so that's awesome, but may not, maybe El Paso. It was continuously trying to just find out information so that I could get better, so that I can impart some of that little wisdom in the training program. And at some point, your head just explodes. It's just too much. And you realize I'm not going to be able to get all the information in the world. I can't read all the books. I can't hear all the podcasts. I need a base. I need a base of support. I need a philosophy. I need some principles, and I need to go with that. And I need to sprinkle some stuff in it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't work, that's okay too. And I get a lot of, and I use a lot of feedback from the athlete. How does this feel? Does this work? What's the context here? And you know from working with athletes that they're super smart, right? They get it. The guys that are really, really at a high level, they get it. They want to know, why are we doing this? Again, what's the context? Why these sets? Why this tempo? They get it. And so that information comes back, and it's more valuable than any information I'm getting from the outside, because that then allows you to completely adapt and regulate the program.
Great. We're going to talk a bit and just finish up with this idea of technology again. And I had a question here for you about the whole social media thing. And I know we're kind of doing that right now. We're going to promote, this interview. But what's the balance in your mind in terms of, being a professional in this industry? How do we use it to our advantage, and how do we not over inundate ourselves?
There's certainly an advantage, right? It's not, technology is not inherently evil. Twitter is a perfect example that it gives you an opportunity to connect and network with people that you would probably never in your life be able to do, to network and connect, right? No question about that. You send a tweet or direct message, you're connected. Whether they respond or not is a different story, but you're definitely connected. And you have this real time or available real time data information, like right there, right now. The research came out yesterday, it's on Twitter. Like you wake up, boom, there it is. So there's a lot of good things about it. I got on Twitter to share information. That was my main reason. I could care less about anything else. It was really about what's the best medium for me to start sharing not only my information, but the information I really believe is valuable, which in turn makes you and your timeline valuable, and on, and the world goes round. But there's no question an inherent evil to it, and that is the addictive part of the technology, right? Uh, Clearly, there's a need to be more selective. The sources of data, whatever that, it could be Twitter, it could be Facebook stuff, it could be Instagram. The source of data that we choose to consume each day has to be really, it really has to enrich the quality of our lives via content. If not, then it really becomes noise. And there's a critical and arguably a bigger issue, which is, it's about time, and we only have a certain amount of time, but we're consuming these vast quantities of information with very little return on our investment. It really is. And I think that we have to ask a question of what drives the behavior. What is it? Often it's, and I know it was for me, it was the fear of missing out, right? If I'm not on Twitter and I'm not getting from, I'm missing out on this stuff, and not being relevant, right, with the information as it comes out. Super, super. That was me. Super important when it comes to technology. I think we're the first generation that has to deal with smartphones, and we're saturated with Wi-Fi and artificial EMFs, which have a disastrous effect on athletes and recovery. But it also has a disastrous effect on coaches and recovery. So we're really good on imposing load on athletes and having them recover from load. We're really bad at imposing load and recovering loads from ourselves. We almost put ourselves out of the picture. So there's a lot of great stuff about it. I think you have to be kind of careful. We don't, I'm certainly not going to say, hey, don't use technology. It's not inherently evil, but I think we need to start making better choices with the available time that we have, because I can't imagine having had social media during that burnout that I had. It would have been faster and would have been deeper. No question in my mind about that. And so that is certainly an added factor that we didn't have then that we have now, that I think is coaches have to be careful. It's great, but I think you have to figure out how you set the limitations on yourself. We tell our guys just two simple rules, which is when you wake up in the morning, you do not reach for your phone at all. You don't check social media. You start your day, you take your water with lemon, you take your bath, you get to the facility, we do what we need to do. And then in between those parentheses, you can be on Twitter or Facebook 1,000 hours if you want. And the other thing bracketed at the end is no social media, no phone 2 to 3 hours before bed, depending on what time you go to bed. Those two little things have become really magical prescriptions that not only do we give out, but we use ourselves. And I can tell you, for me, it's kind of changed my life. I don't reach for my phone in the morning anymore. I do what I need to do. I'll read the book I need to read. It might be just a page from a peer-reviewed article, whatever it is. And I start my day, and then only then do I reach for the phone. And it is addictive. There's no question. There's a disconnect that happens that I think that's when you realize you got a problem.
Yeah, well, and it goes back to what you had said initially about this idea that we have to adapt to our environment, and maybe that's a way that we have to adapt our behavior to make sure it is congruent with good health and good mental
Right.
health and all that. So now, what are you doing? What's coming up for you? Are you speaking anywhere? Do you have any projects that you can tell people about?
Yeah, I'll be speaking at the USOC Performance Symposium at Colorado Springs in May. And then I'll be speaking in June at Altus, which I'm really looking forward to because I'll be there with Sean Miska. And we have sort of very similar philosophies in thinking about movement and performance and stuff. So, and Altus is just, Altus reminds me of that Russian methodology, that simplicity in training. They know what works. They do what works. They care less about the noise, and they just sprinkle in stuff here or there. And so I'm super excited about those two things.
That's
And
great. Well, I'll make sure that we promote that, and if people can connect with you more, that's great. I want to thank you for taking the time. I think you're somebody out there that provides leadership in many different areas, and even just like we talked about, the life philosophy stuff is very. I think it's what you're saying is very useful to future generations of strength coaches who are trying to find their bearings and like, okay, what is my definition of success?
yeah, maybe that burnout, was the worst thing that happened to me, no question. It's also the best thing that happened to me, no question. And I think that there's lessons inherently to learn from that. I don't know too many people that have come out and said, hey, so here's what burnout looks like and what it feels like, and very uncomfortable in many ways for me. But I think the message is important. And if it's a message that really jives with the new set of strength coaches coming out, that they realize, hey, this is possible, there's things I need to do now, then it's absolutely 1,000% worth it. And so I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and I think, just like probably you hear about with the military people that you work with, it's a discussion that isn't had enough. Like, people aren't taking the time to talk about these things, because if you're a strength coach, you're supposed to be this tough dude that leads men and all that, and so
Right. And it's happening. The thing is that we know it's happening. It's kind of a taboo, pink elephant in the room subject, but I think it's time. It needs to come out, and not in a bad way. Just here's what it is, and just be careful.
yeah. Well, thank you. Wise words, George, and thank you for taking the time this afternoon. And
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me, Derek.
look
Appreciate it.
look forward to interacting with you more.
Same here.
I think you could tell that was a pretty enjoyable discussion for me. Just interacting with George, and even when we got off the recording, we kept talking, and each of us shared our own stories, our own experiences, and brought us a little closer together. And again, just a great guy to talk to. Great. I'd love to be able to go out and go skateboarding with him. He could teach me how to surf. But just somebody that I think you would get a lot of comfort in just talking about life and how it relates to training. So if you have any feedback, or you want to get in touch with George, or send a message, you can get us on Facebook at Strength Power Speed with no vowels, on Twitter at Strength Power Speed, and also this will be on YouTube. We'll also put some contact information for George in the descriptions, and by all means, just another great human being that you should connect with. And yeah, until next time, thank you very much from Strength Power Speed.